Well, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for no video yesterday, but unfortunately I had to travel to Blati. So I'm in Blati, and unfortunately it's cold, and the weather here is absolutely appalling. In any case, let's actually give you a news update. Actual news is rather interesting at the moment, but before we get onto the news, if I can yet again remind you, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. And if you'd like to support the work that I do, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. Price of coffee in the UK at the moment is like £5 a coffee. What the hell, man? That's like 120 rand for a freaking coffee. What's it made from? Gold? In any case, let's go into the news. So the news at the moment is that the US has now cut defense ties with South Africa. Apparently, they actually had some cooperation with the South African government. I didn't actually know that myself. Maybe you did. But in any case, they have now cut any forms of ties with the South African National Defence Force. And nobody really knows why. The speculation is that this may be a prelude to the incoming sanctions that may be applied against the ANC. Now, this actually comes following a tweet by Kali Kriel, who basically noted that one of the military individuals got the boot. Him and his assistants were told to, leave the United States. This is obviously after the ambassador also got chucked out of the United States. He was also then one of the individuals who then noted that targeted sanctions may be inbound. Targeted sanctions being on ANC individuals specifically. That's not sanctions to the country as a whole. Now, this becomes interesting because the ANC has then responded to it, noting that the possibility of sanctions against its leaders were actually increasing. They actually said they understand that they now may be sanctioned individually. They said, well, if the US decides to do that, what are they going to do about it? I mean, the US wants to do it, the US wants to do it, then the US are going to do it. They did, however, say that they intended to try to fix the relationship with the US. They wanted to, quote-unquote, mend the fences. Now, the reason for that is because they noted that the loss of AGOA itself would have huge impacts on South Africa, specifically around the unemployment rate and the loss of jobs. Now, one thing you can take from this is that the ANC itself isn't that worried about their leaders getting sanctioned, probably because their money's in Dubai, but they are worried about huge job losses, which could lead to civilian unrest, and that unrest be directly targeted against, them. Because that's actually happened in certain countries around the world, as I'm sure you, dear viewer, know. Now, this obviously all comes on the back of the constitutional judgment, which says it will not review the Kill the Boer ruling. This effectively means that they are saying they don't actually want to look at the case to determine whether the singing of Kill the Boer is actually hate speech or not. Now, the reason they give for not wanting to review that case is they say there's no prospects of success of the case. That means whoever brings the case, in this instance, I think it was AfriForum, didn't really have a hard chance of actually succeeding with the case in the first place. So there's no point in them hearing the case. Now, that becomes a very interesting statement because effectively what they're doing is siding firmly with the South African Court of Human Rights. And we've seen that in the tweets that Julius Malema has then given, basically directly against Elon Musk and copying in the President of the United States, Donald Trump, basically saying, we'll do what we want, and if you want to attack us, we'll get you with fire. And that's a very interesting approach because Colonel Chris Wyatt says, he feels that's tantamount to a direct threat against the President of the United States, a threat against his safety, which would have the Secret Service basically reviewing the matter. I'm not sure I agree, because obviously everybody understands that Julius is just retarded with his rhetoric, and it was clearly a rhetorical statement. And it's meant to be this whole fighters type rhetoric that they apply when it comes through to the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters. So they always use that kind of language. Hence, they always use the symbolism of the machine gun, the pow, 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 because they think it makes them somehow better soldiers, even though it just makes them look more retarded to the rest of us. In any case, Julius says it's now his right to sing the song as much as he wants, because the Constitutional Court even agrees, and sing it to his heart's content. And this prompted the Freedom Front Plus to say that while South Africans buried the apartheid hatchet a long time ago and actually wanted to contribute to the country, an individual such as this are making them not want to contribute to the country. In fact, they're making them feel unwelcome. And interestingly enough, Imbalula himself, Imbalula's pretty frequently says stupid stuff. Imbalula came out and said something that was actually smart. He says he doesn't understand the modern relevance of the song on political discourse, because we don't live in that era anymore. Yes, we live 30 years after the end of apartheid, where the ANC has had the control over the state. They've been able to control it for 30 years. But we're going to sing a song about destroying the previous establishment and killing people. Doesn't actually have relevance in the modern terms. And this has led the DA to ask the fundamental question: why has Ramaphosa not given a view on this? Ramaphosa hasn't said that he supports the song, he hasn't said he doesn't support the song. In fact, he's actually been mute on the topic. And that muteness is kind of like silence means acceptance. It's an old adage. But actually, the real reason that Ramaphosa doesn't want to say anything about it is because there's elements in the ANC, the RET elements, if you will, the radicals, that do still support the song. And as you know, the ANC is a mix of both the Ramaphosa faction and the RET faction. It's always been that way. And he doesn't want to inflame the RET faction because they'll call him a sellout. And he thinks he might lose some support. That's Ramaphosa in just a simple statement, I'm afraid. So it is what it is. In any case, there has been some movement on the whole refugee offer from the United States. And that is that Donald Trump says that he's setting up plans for Mission South Africa, which will be in Pretoria, and will allow up to 8,000 individuals to basically, go to a refugee center, a temporary refugee center, where their applications can be submitted in protest. Now, this becomes interesting because apparently they've already had 8,200 applications, which means that the temporary refugee center will already be filled with its 8,000 applicants. And apparently they've already identified the first 100 Afrikaners who will be approved for refugee status in America. Now, the idea is to basically screen all these white Afrikaans farmers and see which ones of them actually qualify for the refugee offer, if you will. Apparently, once this initial stage has been done, the United States then intends to propose a long-term solution. In other words, a longer-term plan on the resettlements of eligible Afrikaner applicants to the United States. It's a very interesting approach. Now, the reason this becomes so interesting is because that other refugee programs that were available to other countries have now been closed, specifically in relation to the US. And this is obviously the US's refugee program to Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Syria, all of which have had their refugee programs suspended, whilst we've obviously had the refugee program, open for white Afrikaners. And this obviously, in typical fashion, is, as I'm sure you can guess, it's led to Trump being called racist and basically saying that he's pursuing racial policies. It comes as no surprise to anybody. But as everybody knows, the actual real reason he's doing it is because of the so-called Expropriation Act and obviously the idea for the race-based discrimination, in other words, BE policies.
The question of land, the land of our forefathers and our foremothers must return to our people without any fail and without any payment of compensation. And it must happen now.
Now, I must say that court cases like the whole Kill the Boer ruling isn't exactly helping the ANC, and it's not helping the image of the Republic. That does make it seem like this idea that there is violence being fought against white Afrikaners, and that there is a high degree of racial discrimination against Afrikaners. It does make that seem like that's true. Because even the legal system, the court system, is saying, well, you can sing songs about killing them, and that's fine. Nothing to see here. So I've got to say that this actual judgment was stupid, specifically in relation to South Africa's image. South Africa's international image, I might add. In any case, it's important to understand that the South African government does say that it does plan to reset this relationships. And so maybe one of the reasons it's not freaking out by all of this is because, according to them, they can still fix this. And it's a very interesting concept of how they intend to fix it up. The first is that they've sent a business delegation to New York. This is apparently 600 business delegates who went there to basically say, you've got businesses in our country, we've got your goods on our shelves, we want to continue to trade with you, you need to help us lobby the American government to make sure that we keep our perks. It's a bold strategy because It doesn't involve the usual diplomatic relations that the countries typically tend to engage in, which is obviously our ministry with their ministry sitting together and agreeing what they want to do. Now, part of the reason for this is because the United States doesn't actually want to meet with our ministries. And the reason for that is because it would appear that the ANC has a comment for why all of this is occurring. It's right-wing disinformation. Yep, it's right-wing disinformation. From right-wing parties. Now, who these right-wing parties are, I don't actually know. Is it me, for example, because I comment on this stuff on a public platform? Am I the right-winger? We don't know. But what we do know is that the United States really doesn't want to be lectured to about political rhetoric, basically saying that the United States government is stupid because it doesn't understand South African politics, and it needs the ANC to tell them. Their answer is going to be, we understand things just fine. But you can see that even Park says that they are going to normalize the US relations. Things will be fine. Things will be repaired. But he does note that this might not actually be the case, and even if it is the case, it might only be a short-term thing. And so he said that even if they fix the relationship, South Africa needs to trade with other parties, needs to diversify its trade parties elsewhere. And one of the parties that have been highlighted for this is, well, the EU. This obviously comes on the back of the EU saying that it would plug some of the gaps being left by the cutting of US aid. It's very interesting, this entire thing, because we've seen in Europe that the European Union has become more socialist. And you can clearly see some of the ANC's policies mirrors very clearly some of the EU policies. So what they're effectively saying is that maybe we will just keep trading with people that we find that politically compatible with us. And Donald Trump is not that individual. Which is good, because Donald Trump doesn't feel he's that person either. And so it becomes unlikely that they're going to fix all of this through nothing more than, I don't know, business pressure. And the reason for it becomes obvious. If you look at what the White House says, they do say some of this is about economics. It's about expropriating land. It's about BE policy. But listen carefully what they say. It's really about the case versus Israel, around South Africa's stance to Russia, the South African government's inability to condemn Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, and also its anti-US rhetoric. The ANC for the longest time has been talking a very hardball game against the US. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. And a good example of this is the renaming of Sanctions Drive to One Terrorist Drive. Because this has been muted for a long time. The ANC over a year ago said why they were going to do it, and it was to antagonize the US. Everything was aimed around antagonizing the US, but now the US has responded in kind and said we're no longer going to be pushed, we're now going to punch you in the face when you push us. And this is why this has happened. So going and sending business delegates there isn't going to change that. It's a point of principle. You've gone against their allies, you've gone against their interests, you've tried to antagonize them with parties that they don't get on with, hence One Terrorist Drive. The only way to do this is by changing your foreign diplomatic position. ANC is not going to do that. It's not. Because it would have to admit that it did something wrong. So they're not going to do that. For what they are doing is they're saying, well, the renaming of Sanctions Drive, we're going to put it to the public, and the public's going to vote on it, and then we'll come back off the public participation process and we'll review the renaming of Sanctions Drive. Because the ANC understands that they're actually starting to annoy people. And that annoying of people, they can't get away with it indefinitely. Talking of annoying people that they can't get away with indefinitely, there's still the budget issue between the ANC and the DA. And I've spoken to numerous sources, both within the ANC, the PA, the Freedom Front Plus, all the GNU parties, and including the DA. And ultimately, the actual problem appears to be between the ANC and the DA. They can't reach an agreement. Now, the reason for that is because the DA wants a more active role in the economy. At the moment, it claims that the ANC is still acting like it's the majority party. It's just doing what it wants. It's enacting its own policies. And those policies are still killing jobs and basically sending South Africa to an early grave. They said the only reason they got into politics with the ANC in the first place was to revive the economy and create jobs. And if their positioning there isn't doing that, it's a waste of time. So they've told the ANC that they basically want a more active role in the economy, and they want to basically be involved in some of that. This includes things such as basically getting pay cards, getting in the World Bank to review some of our legislation, see what's killing investment and killing economic growth, and being involved in some of the key portfolios. And the ANC has basically said, Futsak. Now, the reason that there's an actual deadlock between the two is because the ANC is saying Futsak to the DA's suggestions, but isn't counter-proposing. At least that's what the news is. Now, the DA then says that what they're effectively finding is that the ANC is negotiating in bad faith, because it's not negotiating. It's hearing the conditions of supporting the budget, and they're going, can't be bothered. Like, we don't want to be involved with you. Now, this becomes interesting because according to the news, behind the closed doors, Paul Mashatile is having a negotiation session with the EFF. And apparently they're trying to get EFF support to basically push through a budget. Now, EFF support will be conditional on, well, EFF goals. And the DA has said, if you attempt, the ANC that is, to get support for the budget from parties who are not part of the GNU, in order to push something forward that the GNU doesn't agree with, specifically in this instance, the largest GNU party outside of the ANC, being the DA, they said, well, that's effectively the end of the GNU. So you just split it there and then, or we'll walk away. Then obviously do the logical things, which is put a vote of no confidence to the president, which will probably then be supported by the EFF and MK, and the president's gone. The end. And that's not really going to look good for Ramaphosa, is it? So apparently they're still going through the negotiations, and news is not positive. And that non-positivity on the news actually tanked the rand. The rand lost 1% of its value. It's quite a big bit of value to add on nothing more than speculation. This actually shows you that the markets itself, and basically everyone as a whole, does not want to see the EFF anywhere close to the seat of power. So were the EFF actually to come into power, well, we've got 2.0, really. And so the idea at the moment is that the ANC actually understands this. So why is Paul Mashatile actually trying to negotiate this? Well, because Paul Mashatile is almost in direct opposition to Cyril Ramaphosa at this point in time. And so he's trying to come across as like a winner of negotiations in order to almost sideline Ramaphosa and say, I could do what you couldn't. At least that's the speculation. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Anyway, the news as of this morning is that actually a deal may be close to happening. Now, sources close to me told me that the DA and the ANC have been negotiating all weekend. Apparently, the negotiations on Saturday were like 10 minutes. They went in, they said to the ANC, this is what we want. The ANC said, Futsak left. And then they had another meeting on Sunday. Now, obviously, at the time of recording, this is Monday, because it took me all weekend to arrive in this bleak place. In any case, the news apparently is that they now maybe have had some positive negotiations and that a deal may be close to happening. Now, that deal is likely to have more control for the DA, specifically in terms of economic policy, which meant that as of today, well, the rand actually rebounded and it's doing pretty well now, because we went from the end of the GNU to potentially the DA will have more engagement with the economy. And so is there actually going to be a deal, and will it be good for the Republic? I don't know. No one's talking. And I think the reason no one's talking is because they themselves don't know. The ANC knows that they could potentially agree something with the EFF, but it will kill the economy. It won't be good for them. Also mean that their president will get voted out. Otherwise, they're going to release some control to the DA, which means the ANC revolts against itself because they all call each other sellouts and swear at each other all day long. The ANC is in a very difficult position. And at some point in time, it's not going to end well for the ANC itself, because everybody's coming for them. The US is coming for them. Their leaders are about to be sanctioned. The Republic is getting hot with them, and their leaders are about to get voted out of Parliament if they can't agree a budget. Nothing's coming up land ANC. Everything is a disaster for them. And I must say, it's kind of on their own making, so they deserve this. And on a final news story, this news story actually symbolizes everything that's wrong with the ANC, and specifically it's in relation to the ANC Youth League. And the ANC Youth League had a party. Why they needed to have such big parties, I don't know. And in typical fashion, in typical communist fashion, it's the people's money until these guys would have a fun time. because then it was a wine and dine session at a luxury hotel in Sandton, where they had a big party session on the ANC Youth League's bill, in other words, the ANC's bill as well, and they ran up a hotel and a restaurant bill of 870,000 Rand. I mean, that's a big bill. So I'm pretty sure there was a lot of Johnny Walker Black Label going around that evening. And they haven't paid the bill. They're just ignoring the hotel who's asking them to pay their bill. And the hotel has now just said, if you don't pay the bill, we're going to have to go to the courts. We're going to have to seek recovery of our outlay from you through the courts. But this specifically highlights the way that the ANC generally tends to treat the people of the Republic. The entire country is there for the ANC to consume. And there's nothing left to consume, and people are getting fed up with it. And the end of the road is in sight for the ANC. At least that's my view. Please do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, this was a double morning shot, so it was a longer than normal morning shot. Basically, because I didn't get to record a video yesterday. Sorry about that. But in any case, until tomorrow, see you soon. Bye.